Florida Pub. Good morning all and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee of Banner Brycheiniog National Park Authority. I'm pleased to say we have no apologies for absence. We have a full complement of members, so that's excellent. We also welcome Ellen Parry of TIA, our internal audit providers, so croeso cynnes iawn. We also have colleagues from Audit Wales, Charles Rigby and Tim Buckle. In addition, we welcome Sean, who I understand is a stagiaire or is going to on a placement and is welcome to observe our procedures this morning. So that's great. We have no correspondence registered today, and I've not been advised of any declarations of interest either. And in fact, we also have no public speaking requests. And therefore, we move straight to agenda item 5, which is the draft minutes of our meeting of the 18th of November last year of the Audit and Risk Committee. And I'm seeking a proposer and seconder for the adoption of those minutes. And since we were also, I think, a full complement of members, everyone is eligible to do that. I see Professor John and Craig, and can we have a show of hands if colleagues are content to adopt those minutes as a correct record of the meeting? Again, we have that unanimously agreed, so I'm very grateful to you for that. We now move to the action log, which is a new agenda item. There aren't any documents that are included within that on this occasion, but I think we all find that we will all find that a particularly beneficial way going forward of tracking our follow-up to specific actions to ensure that we're keeping that pacey and doing what is necessary. So just to note that again, if colleagues are happy to do so. At the moment, it's a sort of nil return, but it will become increasingly important in our work. Okay, so we've now already hit agenda item 7. This is where the hard work begins, and we've got the budget monitoring report for Q3 that we have the opportunity to discuss and ultimately to note. This would have gone to Finance and Performance Committee, which was scheduled for last week. That meeting actually didn't go ahead, although members of that committee have been advised of its contents, and now is our opportunity to engage with that report. And so with no further ado, I'll ask Richard to lead on that. Richard Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Poe. Okay, so the report is for the 9 months ended December 24, and you can see that the key messages on perhaps if I share my screen, that might help. Just walk me through what
Thank you.
Help. Yeah, hopefully you can all see that. So looking at the key messages, so we've had an in-year top-up of National Park grant of £62,000, which is most welcome, and an indication that we'll get a further £93,000 for the 25-26 in the National Park grant for 25-26. And when you include the levy on top of that, that means that our overall core funding is scheduled to increase by £206,000 for the year 25-26. Looking at the current financial year, we've predicted the budget as set will show a deficit of £546,000. There's been some in-year movements which I can talk about later, which means the current forecast is a deficit of £339,000. The authority in November of last year, the authority was asked to submit for some in-year top-up funding from Welsh Government, so we submitted £1.3 million worth of, or £1.4 million worth of revenue expenditure and 1.1 for capital. To date, we haven't heard anything, which is a bit challenging, in so much that the money clearly won't be spent in this current year, and hopefully we'll have permission to carry whatever monies we do get, we'll be in the position to carry that forward to the next financial year. So looking at the financial projections, they are pretty critical without that additional in-year top-up. I'll talk more about that when I get to it in the paper. And so the forecasts as they currently stand don't include the LTP funding for next year, but we do have some reserves in place which can support it. And the final bullet point there relates to the fact that we do have a number of members of staff who are grant funded, and if those grants aren't forthcoming, then that leaves us in a very difficult situation. Again, I'll talk about that as we move through the paper. So looking at the actual revenue budget as we stand, you can see that the overall net cost service shows an overspend of £206,000. So the profile budget of 3.6 against an actual spend of 3.8. That's more to do with profiling. And looking at the major kind of variances in the table above, you can see, so just to clarify, so we do have, let me just go up a bit if I can, so you can see the headings. Okay, so we've got the original budget and the revised budget and the profile budget. That basically is what expenditure we would expect to incur within the 9-month period. And then there's the actuals and the variances. So the variance as at the end of December 24 was an overspend of £206,000. So within democratic representation and management, there's an overspend of £23,000. Again, some time differences there, but there was a back pay for members, which you should be aware of, there was a miscalculation in the previous 2 financial years, which explains why there's the most of that overspend. In support services, there's a grant which on the Brilliant Basics fund from Welsh Government, which we accrued for last financial year, which hasn't been paid because we hadn't fulfilled some of the conditions. I'm led to believe the conditions have been satisfied, so that money will be coming through before the end of March. So that's about £38,000. And we also got some additional legal fees, which we've discussed before, which are making that that adverse variance. With the planning in place, there it's £105,000 overspent. There is a significant grant on the Us Catchment project of circa £150,000, which we're accruing for, which hasn't been paid as yet. And similarly, there is we're expecting planning fee income to be down about approximately £50,000 against budget. So that explains that adverse variance year to date. And on the interest received, as you're probably aware, we put our money on deposit, on variable deposits, and that those interest rates they started the year quite high. They dipped a bit during the year. They're rising back up again now. So we are projecting a slight underspend or under receipt of income from that interest receivable. Moving on to the forecast for the year. So I told you we started the position of a deficit of 546. I've listed the main reasons why we would know that's come down to £339,000, carrying a number of vacant posts and the pay award, which I talked about before. I say the other significant items are the bottom 2 figures there, which weren't reported in my previous paper. That's to do with the planning fee income and the additional levy. So overall, we're projecting a deficit of £339,000. I mentioned the in-year submission to Welsh Government and how critical it is to our overall finances. And as we speak, we haven't had any confirmation about whether we've been successful in obtaining that additional funding. And to say, when I look at the forecast for the next couple of years, we'll see how significant those funding streams will be. The next section refers to the capital allocation. So as at the end of December, we spent 801,000 against the profile budget of 1.2, but we do anticipate that expenditure will catch up before the end of the financial year. So on a more positive note, we've had a number of in-year kind of grant applications which have been quite successful. The National Peatland Action Programme, another £400,000 per year for the next 3 years. The SLSP money, which we will be getting, that's £830,000 again for the next 2 years. And we put a bid in for the Mynydd Penderyn rather, Healthy Mountain scheme of about £250,000. So that's been successful. And you're probably aware of the Fermio Bro project, which is taking place. So yeah, we do have a number of these additional funding streams which will help support some non-core funded posts, which I've talked about before. So that risk has dissipated somewhat for the next couple of years. Looking at the forecasts for this year and the next 2 years. So the current year is a deficit of 339, and just extrapolating those figures forward for the next 2 years, the 703,000 and £829,000 deficit. And this pot here shows what is available to cover those deficits. So as we start the year, we had 2.2 million to cover the deficit of £300,000. That means the reserve is 1.9. And similarly, obviously, if you take the predicted deficit of £700,000 off that 1.9 at the end of 25-26, that will come back to 1.2. And similarly, that the position for 25-26-27 means that we will end that year with a deficit of £405,000, which is very close to our minimum reserve level. We've been very busy preparing for next year's budget, and these projected deficits for 25-26 have actually gone up, and that's when we're including the LDP costs, but that's for another meeting. But you can see that when we get to the projection shows that we are precariously low, close to our minimum reserve level. And that's the table that the annex is basically to the detail. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Sorry, the one thing I probably should touch upon, I haven't, that's related to the insurance claim, which is here, of potential insurance claim to the damage that we've sustained. I could only find it. So as you're aware, we did have a significant storm damage at our site at Craigenorse, and across the authority that came to approximately £400,000. We have put some money. The Welsh Government did open up a pot of funding for the storm damage. We have been in negotiations with the Welsh Government officers regarding what isn't claimable. We've also submitted a grant claim, insurance claim against our insurers, and again those discussions are ongoing. So there is a potential that there will be some exposure to the authority regarding the restoration work as a result of the storm damage. But we do think that we won't be able to use the SLSP funding pot to cover any amounts which aren't covered by the Welsh Government storm damage grant and insurance. I'll take a breath there and take any questions. There we go.
Thanks, Richard. I mean, financial sustainability is sort of shot through this meeting agenda like a stick of rock, really. And I know a couple of colleagues have got significant areas that they wish to question on. Just a couple of openness from me, if that's okay. Firstly, could you clarify what the two categories under planning are? There clearly planning fee income being down kind of is sort of self-explanatory, particularly given the moratorium on substantial development in one or more of our key settlements. But I wasn't clear what the planning performance figure, which was more favourable, related to. And my other question for now was, you gave us good news about the prospect of this year's Brilliant Basics monies being forthcoming. We also noted, and you spoke to it, I think 318,000 on two Brilliant Basics projects for the coming period, but what is the match funding obligation that comes with that that particular grant offer, if it's forthcoming, and could that come from one or other of the as yet not confirmed allocations from Welsh Government? And I'm conscious that colleagues are about to come forward with probably more substantial questions. Thank you.
Okay, just the as you said, the planning fee income is basically our general kind of fees for applications for general planning processes.
Yeah,
we do offer a service for advice, particularly for larger developments, which is over and above the planning kind of income. So that's basically the larger developments where we're giving developers advice, which we're getting we're charging a fee for. Sorry, and the
other bit was around the Brilliant Basics match funding and the obligations we have there.
So yeah, what we have been doing is match funding from SLSP pots. So we're using that SLSP reserve of grant to match any additional funding required. So it's coming. It's not coming out of core. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Firstly, Councillor Hugh Williams, and then Mr. Craig Stevenson has indicated afterwards. Firstly, to you, Hugh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You nicked my question, but I will forgive you. But Richard, thank you for this. There's clarity. You've gone through it with us. I've read it previously, and I'm grateful for the information that's provided there. It's stark. We know where we stand. So I thank you for that. I'm going to go back to planning and core, because on the core revenue budget, there is this variance of 105,000. You mentioned, and I didn't quite catch it, it's for clarity, something to do with the Wye catchment, whether it was a grant or not. I didn't quite catch.
We do a lot of work on the catchment situation. So and that's funded from Welsh Government grant. So we've incurred expenditure up until the end of December, and the overall grant is about 160,000 pounds. So we've incurred expenditure, and we haven't had that receipt of the grant yet. We will be submitting it in the next few weeks. So that will reduce the operating costs as they currently. Well, it won't reduce. There'll be income to match offset that expenditure. So the overall deficit won't be as great as it currently appears.
Right, I think that's quite significant, Richard. Am I wrong in thinking that? I mean, if we're knocking off whatever it is, 105,000, that's welcome news. And we must chase it, if you see what I mean.
Oh yeah, we will. I mean, it's purely a timing issue. We will. For the last few years, we've had this grant regarding the catchment. It's a problem that which were well publicised. So we are trying to. We a lot of work going on there. We will then claim the expenditure that we've incurred at the end of the financial year. So that grant will come in. So yeah, you're right. It's looking. While it's showing an adverse variance, it's probably it's more favourable than not.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Diolch, Hugh. Craig.
Thank you, diolch. Yeah, actually, Hugh just took my first question as well, so we've got a pattern flowing here. So yes, and again, thanks Richard for the paper and taking us through, and for explaining that answer on the catchments and the grants. That's good. My other sort of kind of specific question was about Storm Dara and the level of a potential financial risk to us if neither the Welsh Government nor the insurers settle with us. I just wondered if you happen to know what that level of financial risk was.
We did an estimate very shortly after the damage was incurred. We did an estimate of about £400,000 worth of costs. A lot of that would be our own staff time. which we estimate how much additional in-house time would have to be allocated to support that. That said, there is some structural damages to the buildings at the pavilion at Craigenors, which we are definitely at circa about £50,000, and because it's a building, it will be covered by the buildings insurance. The wind damage with the uprooting of the trees, if the trees have just fallen on ground and it's not incurred any damage, then that's not subject to a insurance claim. But if the trees fall on a pathway of damage, a fence or whatever, then that will be covered. So it's quite an integrated process of working out what the other causality of where this damage came from. So yeah, there is an exposure, but we've had notification from Welsh Government. We've submitted some paper probably the second week of January to Welsh Government. We were a response about a month ago, and I think they've offered about £40,000 with asking for further clarification, which we submitted again 2 weeks ago, but we haven't had any feedback from that as yet. Okay. The work with the insurance company is again, it's going to be there's a bit of horse trading. Our brokers Marsh have been very helpful in the last 2 meetings that we've had with the loss adjuster, trying to say that we will, if you try and interpret the policies, basically what isn't included. So yeah, to answer your question, Craig, at this stage I can't give you a straightforward answer what the overall exposure will be to authority, but we do think that the SLSP funding pot will be in a position that should be able to cover most of that uninsured or non-grantable losses that we've incurred.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so it might make the NGO position a bit better if that comes through. But my second area of question is probably more substantial. It may not be just for this committee. It may be a bigger one for the Finance and Performance Committee, or even for us as an authority. Is more about the section relating to reserves and our in a couple of years our inability to set a budget in line with our reserves, our acceptable reserves level, because we're operating year on year in a deficit position, and we're trying to grapple with financial sustainability as well as capacity. And while we've been making progress on that, which was recognised by Audit Wales previously, we've now got this letter, which is maybe part of the next discussion, pushing us a bit further and harder on that. So I just express a worry about the lead-in time to that position where we may be having to set a budget that falls outside what we've agreed as an authority as an acceptable reserves level, which raises a different level of risk for us. As I said, might not be just entirely for this committee, it might be a bigger discussion, but I just wanted to kind of air my concerns from when I'm reading the paper and joining up some issues, just to say that out loud to all of us.
Thanks for that, Craig. Richard, if you could respond initially, maybe Catherine has some reflections on that point too.
I can do. Obviously, we've as I alluded in the paper, back in November, we submitted about £1.3 million with additional revenue funding, and that's non-hypothecated, so we could allocate that. And ultimately, obviously, 1.3 million would certainly help the reserve position. You can see that would be that we'd, instead of having reserves at £400,000, we'd have 1.7 million pounds worth of reserves at the end of 25, 26, 27. I say the problem that we have is what assurance can we give with regard to the additional Welsh Government money that we might or might not receive. It's very difficult at this stage, Craig. Back in November, we were almost guaranteed that the cheque will be with us before Christmas, but it hasn't been forthcoming. So whether that's 1.3 or even £500,000, if for the revenue funding, if whatever we get will certainly help the 26-27 reserve position. So yeah, I can't give a clear and a definitive answer, apart from the fact that the minute we get additional funding or whatever we get from Welsh Government, we will notify members. But dealing with a structural deficit is quite challenging. But I think my observations is that while we are looking at means of looking at additional income opportunities and making savings where we can, as you're probably aware of better than I am, that the authority has gone through significant reduction in manpower, and dare I say, we're probably at a critical mass now. So it's a really challenging time.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Richard.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think one thing that strikes all of us as members is how difficult this must be for those of you charged with forward planning and our financial resilience. And it's probably not appropriate for us to write expressing that to Welsh Government. But I think since we're meeting and discussing this item, I certainly would like to put on record my own concern at the slippage. Albeit it's not a right, but it is something that we've been, the additional funding is something that has been sort of presented as a highly likely additional support, and it's not been forthcoming. It must be pretty difficult for senior executives, particularly, to be sustaining their spirits as this goes forward. So that's just something that I felt the need to say. Whether anybody's listening is another issue. Catherine, any additional points on that matter just now?
No, thank you. I think we'll pick these up again in the next discussion anyway. Thank you. Okay,
excellent. Well, in that case, that's a fairly full airing of these points. And if we could move to note that budget monitoring update. All colleagues content to do that? Yeah, excellent. Good. Thank you very much indeed. Moving now to agenda item 8, as Catherine said, there's a certain continuity of theme here, and we move to the Audit Wales letter, which relates to the progress in delivering the Auditor General's statutory recommendations. Catherine, I believe you're going to introduce. Thank you.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Yeah, bore da. Members, so just a few words from me, and then I think probably important to hear from Audit Wales themselves on the letter. Yeah, so sure. We've received this latest follow-up letter from Audit Wales colleagues. Obviously, we'd like to thank Audit Wales for the ongoing engagement on our follow-up of these important statutory recommendations. I have to share with members that I was quite disappointed with the letter. We've worked tremendously hard to try and implement the statutory recommendations, which were now made over 4 years ago, and before many of the current senior team joined the organisation. Whilst we fully recognise that the items called out in the letter around financial sustainability and our officer capacity are, the issues of our moment, undoubtedly, quite their impact on delivering the statutory recommendations and what is left to do, I think, is an important area of discussion. To my mind, we're dealing with two separate, very serious issues, and potentially the follow-on work that Audit Wales will undertake quite soon to look at our financial sustainability may be a better vehicle then for taking forward the concerns about financial sustainability and capacity. Anyway, I am somewhat disappointed with the letter. I feel we've made a lot of progress. I did have to ask Audit Wales to recognise more of the progress that we'd made in the letter in the final version, and I was very grateful to them for reflecting some more of that progress. But I think it would be interesting and important to have a discussion this morning about what else there is to do, as I would feel that it would be a significant morale boost to the authority, and certainly to myself and the senior officer team, if we were able to leave these statutory recommendations behind us having been delivered. So yeah, over to others now for their their views on this letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. If I could invite either Tim or Charles to speak to the substantive issue of the letter, that would be really helpful. I don't know which of you is proposing to lead.
I'll take that, Chair. Thank you.
Yep, go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, members.
And most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us present the letter to yourselves this morning. Just to make you aware, my name is Charles. I'm the audit lead responsible for the national parks at Audit Wales from a performance audit perspective. So as Catherine mentioned, the Auditor General made three statutory recommendations in February 2021 with regards to the change programme that was then in place at the authority. We followed these up a couple of times, most recently in May 2023. As set out in our letter, we focused primarily on the three focus areas that the authority informed us last time that they would be focusing on. That would be in terms of the overall progress on the action plan, the work to strengthen governance and decision making, and also organisational capacity and resilience to deliver general improvement. And overall, we found that a lack of organisational capacity and resilience presents a significant risk to the future sustainability of the authority and its ability to deliver the Auditor General's recommendations. We primarily reached this conclusion because through this piece of work, which we completed in October and November of last year, as well as the other pieces of work which will be reported to your committee in the coming meetings, I hope, around wellbeing objective setting and promoting access to the national park. We heard concerns as set out in the letter, particularly around organisational capacity and the financial position. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, that they are two elements of running any kind of organisation that are pervasive to its ability to deliver. And it's worth noting, in particular, to the first statutory recommendation around the change programme, the action plan for that's mentioned in the recommendation has been folded into business as usual business planning. And as part of that, then, in order to deliver that's particularly where some concerns of officers came forward, was around that ability to deliver that in the financial context that Richard set out this morning, as well as the capacity of officers to do that as business as usual, as well as business improvement tasks, to say. So that's really where that comes from in terms of the original statutory recommendations. We have recognised, particularly since the fieldwork was completed, there has been some progress, as the letter sets out, particularly around revising the scheme of delegation. Other key documents have also been approved by yourselves, which reflects the progress. However, obviously, progress in itself is limited by the financial situation, which is also set out in the letter. We've also recognised in there the challenging geographic and organisational context that the authority has to work within. So then turning to the final section, which is around the officer-member relationships. We have in the past noted some challenges for the authority in this area, and we are pleased to report to yourselves that the relations have improved. The letter does set out some concerns that we heard in terms of engagement from some members. We've not sought to audit that in detail because some of those themes came out on our recent national study around national park model governance in general. So we intend to follow up through that piece of work, that particular aspect of the letter. So just coming to the next steps, as Catherine mentioned, we intend to complete a financial sustainability review of the authority in the coming couple of months. We have fieldwork arranged later this month in order to meet officers to do that. That will follow a very similar approach to an approach we've taken with the principal councils, but obviously reflecting the different nature of the body as a national park authority. And it's about the arrangements the authority has in place to secure value for money in its use of resources, which reflects the statutory duty the Auditor General has in general in his performance audit work. So aside from thanking officers for meeting with us and engaging with us on this piece of work, I'm happy to open the floor for any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Charles, for speaking to the letter. I think the point's already been made that that we are somewhat at a loss without more concrete, specific signposts as to how we take this forward. It may, of course, be that the outcome of the sustainability appraisal, financial sustainability appraisal, will actually be core to that. I'd also just note, I mean, there's clearly no member and no committee has got cause for complacency, but in terms of I'm very grateful as chair to members of this committee in that the commitment that we've seen. Just observe, just anecdotally, that in the last meeting and this meeting, we have a full attendance of both cadres of membership, both Welsh Government appointees and from the local government family. So we're doing our best, but we can always do better, and we realise that. And leading on doing better, I see Craig Stevenson has indicated he's got some questions for us. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to raise a couple of issues when I was doing my preparation last night. So, one of the things that caught me off guard a little bit, I suppose, was that we previously had a letter saying there were, kind of green shoots of progress from Audit Wales on the statutory recommendations. And it's something that we regularly pick up in this committee and in other forums with senior officers asking for progress and talk about lots of things, and lots of these then feed back to some of the statutory recommendations about culture of the organisation and that kind of thing. As a new member since 2023, I've felt that improvement, the direction of travel has been a more positive one. So the first thing I just wanted to say was that when I read the letter, I don't know whether it was the tone of the letter or what, but it felt that it didn't recognise for me that progress and change that I've seen and witnessed. Obviously, the financial sustainability and staff capacity is a difficult issue, and it's another issue we regularly discuss, because if we increase the staff capacity, it puts us in a more precarious and risky position financially. And I could bring up a whole load of other recommendations from Audit to do with being frivolous with public money. So we are very careful about these kind of decisions, and we obviously challenge Catherine and senior officers around those things. So that there was that, and then I think we've already talked about the lack of specifics. What exactly isn't shown, which parts are showing insufficient progress, when the feeling, I think, in the room is that we are seeing and feeling some progress. It might not be as speedy as we would like when we're. Our role is to challenge as part of the authority, and we do on these things, and we understand why the pace might not be what it is in other organisations who are on a better financial footing. So it would be good as a follow-on from this, or in response to this, if it would be helpful, as Catherine alluded to in her opening address, to have more detail around those, because I think that will help with some of the morale issues, particularly in the senior team. And then you did talk about in the letter staff morale and wellbeing issue being a worry. And there's a particular group, we've been getting progress reports on this group, headed by a senior officer. A lot of work and energy has been put into staff wellbeing because of the change programme, and which, obviously from which the statutory recommendations came. So it's something that we've been aware of, and it's good that you've recognised that staff member relations have improved. But the one thing that concerned me was, that this issue about morale and staff wellbeing being presented as an issue that we thought was improving. So I just did wonder in your fieldwork how many people you spoke to, not to undermine what is being said or anything, or undermine the fieldwork that has been done, but just to get a flavour, as a small authority, and sometimes small groups of people and an opinion can influence something. So it'd be good for us as members just to get a flavour of, how many people and whether it's a significant issue. And then my only other point was then you know already, because you've recognised it in your letter, about capacity and staffing and financial sustainability issues are a matter of priority and a concern for us. But you've asked for us to address, at the end of the letter, to address the statutory recommendation as a matter of urgency. And I just wondered what that means for you, and because we might need to have another discussion around our ability to address those things and whether we need to prioritise some more than others. And again, I guess that comes more into like having some specifics that will enable us to kind of allocate relevant time and capacity to addressing those things. So that's my bunch of queries. Thank you.
Diolch, Craig. That's a substantial enough body of questions for anyone to answer at one go. I just note that Professor John is standing by, and back to Charles and possibly any colleague input also. Charles. Great.
I'll make a stab at the list of questions, Chair, and then Tim can jump in if there's anything sure. I've missed. In terms of the tone of the letter, I think that comes in part from two elements from my perspective. Firstly, as Catherine mentioned, it is 4 years since the recommendations were made, so there naturally is a reflection on the time in terms of the seriousness and the pace of that. I think, obviously we have reflected that a significant amount of progress has been made in that, and particularly around those governance documents. But I think officers during field work reflected that that's not a process that's complete. I think that's probably an area that in order to fully reflect on completion of objectives, those key governance documents are probably there in terms of that. In terms of who we spoke to, with regards to this piece of work, we spoke to the senior leadership team. We also spoke to officers in HR and the kind of the corporate kind of officers. But I would say that the field work that was done on this piece of work, like I mentioned, October, November last year, we also met with officers with regards to our 2 other audits at the same time. So we're confident that we gauged a fair and representative element of the morale and well-being of officers across the authority, which has been at the forefront of our mind in writing the letter. In terms of our next steps, obviously we'll do the financial sustainability review, and at the conclusion of that, it's an opportunity for ourselves to kind of take a step back and to reassess kind of obviously the significant concerns in this letter primarily stem from the financial situation, and it's kind of with that kind of knowledge and evidence base, it's an opportunity for us to stand back and reflect whether we need to follow this up again, whether we say these recommendations are no longer relevant because of the financial context, or there's things in between there as well. As you appreciate, it's a spectrum of different options there. It may be that we conclude that some have been implemented, some have not been implemented. Of course, it will depend on that kind of opportunity to reflect back. I think it's around in the field work, we particularly heard around the morale as being an improving concept, but not one that's job done yet. I think the well-being stuff that you mentioned there is there. It is part of that. I think, like I mentioned, the key governance documents particularly like I mentioned, the scheme of delegation had not been reapproved at the time of the field work. So, once that process is complete, that's the kind of key evidence I would say that we're looking for in terms of completion. But like I mentioned in the presentation of the letter, because the action plan has been rolled into business planning, then it comes back to the financial sustainability and that resilience of officers. I recall during field work, particularly in the senior leadership team, a sense of having to juggle different responsibilities that are not in their portfolio, and the impact that was having on their ability to strategically plan, for example. They're the kind of things that we'll have to weigh up, and whether we need to follow up in detail on this again. We don't intend to do this next year. We intend to give the authority, a reasonable amount of time in order to follow up on these recommendations, to take on board our findings of financial sustainability, etc. And we'll take on board, like I mentioned, whether these recommendations remain valid in the context of that financial sustainability review. But it comes back to the findings, and that stand back assessment comes back to, during the field work, we heard significant concerns from across the organisation about that resilience and capacity, and that's dictated the tone and the nature of the follow up, I think. Tim, was there anything that you wanted to add to that I've missed?
Nothing substantive, Charles. I think just quickly to re-emphasise the point, and obviously the point that Catherine made about when we stop following up. I think, as Charles hopefully has articulated, we will consider that. We always consider that, but how we follow up and when we stop, or whether we treat this as a separate exercise in future, or whether we follow up through our other ongoing work and get to that position. I think what Charles has explained, in a sense, which you'd expect after 4 years, is the situation has moved on, obviously, and the findings that we've set out in the letter, it's not a straight, this is what the authority said it would do, and this is what it's done. It's more of a, as Charles said, listening to the evidence we heard and reflecting back on that, what we think the key issues were in terms of those potential barriers to progress. So I think already what we're I think describing is a position that's changed, and therefore how we follow up to take the question, I think, that was effectively posed to us, and when these are effectively put to bed, that all becomes part of that conversation as well. So it's not a simple yes, no in terms of follow-up, and also I think it's about the value of the exercise we conduct as well. So if we just simply did that, I'm not sure that would be as useful potentially to the authority also, rather than us taking that step back, as Charles has said, and thinking about the bigger picture. So I hope that's helped to explain where we're coming from. I think Charles has explained the reasons why we set out the letter in that way, so hopefully that's helped to explain that as well.
Diolch, thanks. It's useful to get that perspective as well, so thank you.
Thanks both. I've also found that really helpful in terms of setting the context of where we go next. And where I'm going next is Professor John Hunt and Catherine to stand by.
Thank you, Gareth. I'd just like to briefly totally endorse what Craig's saying about the tone of the letter and the reference to the green shoots. Certainly since I've been temporarily with Craig joining the authority as a member, I can speak of no words other than praise for the excellent relationships that, as member, I have with the officers and how supportive they are. And I really feel the mood that the officers should be able to take from a letter like this is that the green shoots are still thriving. And of course, there's the resource challenge. I'm a disabled member. Perhaps I need more support through an organisation than most. It's not for, I can say that, they can't. But the support that I get, the relationships that we have as members with the officers is superb and collegiate, dynamic, efficient, and I really would like to see that borne out in the letter. Our new charter is member charter is being cited as an exemplar of good practice, and I think we should be seeing that coming through in reports. So thank you.
Diolch. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. So delivering these statutory recommendations is obviously a top priority for us as a team and an authority. So I'm just sort of recalling the chronology of this and feeling a bit sort of still finding the link between the systemic issues in the authority and the original recommendations. You know, I worry about being penalised for things that we are trying to control but are within the control of others, and that's quite difficult as a senior leader in the organisation. So just on a point of detail, the scheme of delegation has now been back to members. It has been approved. That's now been published, so hopefully that's a tick. One of the follow-up letters asked us to seek the assistance of Welsh ministers, which we did, and engaged with their assistance, and then maintained with our own resources the input of a governance consultant who has helped us to work through things like the Charter Ways of Working, which Professor John has just mentioned, our statutory documents, our scheme of delegation. I put a lot of work into the risk framework, and we're just at the stage of doing hopefully, if members agree later, a second stage of review of that. We have a new operating model and, you know, have completely redressed all of those issues. We're now just picking our way through the standing orders, which we hope will come to members at the next National Park Authority and so on. So I go back to the statutory recommendations and just look at them one by one. So drive forward the change programme from 2021. All the senior leadership on the executive side who were leading that process are no longer with the authority. We agreed with Audit Wales that that change programme was abandoned. Obviously, there is still change that we need to implement, but in terms of kind of ticking the box, is that still outstanding? I would say no. Vesting scrutiny of the delivery plan in the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. We now have a different committee structure. It's with this committee, and we review those issues regularly. We do update regularly. There's a different scale of communication with officers, and we've got the wellbeing programme and so on, in which we try to address poor morale and so on. The strengthened governance recommendations, I think, you know, you can always do more to embed documentation and ways of working, but I think it would be really useful to understand from Audit Wales at which point you say we've kind of done those recommendations. I think we have. It's the years of embedding bit that, you know, you have to sort of reach a view about when it's time to say that those have been done. And then in terms of the strengthening decision making, recommendation 3 of the statutory recommendations, we took a decision about the park policy forum. We now have a series of member development days and so on, and we've made quite substantial changes to how we write and organise committee papers, and are continually making improvements. We now have action logs with each meeting and so on. We try and avoid jargon. We've got a new review process for papers. Are they the best papers of any committee in the world ever? No, that's what we aspire to, but we continue to try and make progress. So what I'm trying to say is that the financial sustainability of the organisation and the issues that gives us on capacity, I don't believe have stood in the way of us making substantial improvements on governance and decision making. And some of the issues around that, I believe, should be taken forward in another way. They are systemic issues for the authority. I suppose as the senior executive leader of this organisation, I would find it quite demoralising and challenging if we're not able to say at some point soon that we have delivered these statutory recommendations, but the authority faces different and systemic problems which we are working hard to address, but which are not entirely within the gift of this National Park Authority. And I think if we could get to that place, that would be more heartening than going back to 4-year-old recommendations, which we have worked very hard to deliver. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, for articulating the views of several of us particularly well. Charles.
Thank you, Chair. I'd accept that it's completely fair challenge from Catherine with regards to our work. What I would say is, you know, we can ultimately only report the findings that we collect, you know, and we collate. And, you know, in terms of the policies, I again, I'm pleased to hear the standing orders are forthcoming soon. I think during the field work, there was definitely commentary around kind of the progress on that had been limited because of having to juggle that on top of day-to-day work. But that's where it comes back to that kind of that capacity issue, which is kind of at the heart of this. What I would say, the financial sustainability work is not directly follow up from this. It's complete. It will be conducted under Section 17 of the Public Audit Wales Act, the value for money arrangements duty that the Auditor General has. It is a separate piece of work, but it is kind of the findings that we've made with regards to the recommendations and the field that we completed. That was the key message that was shone, through on that. When asking officers and members about the recommendations and particularly the action plan that was implemented as a result. I can't recall if it was the last letter or the first follow-up letter. With regards to those focus areas that were mentioned there, these are the messages that were coming up, and ultimately we report on the findings and the field work that we do. But like I mentioned during the question earlier from Craig, following the completion of the financial sustainability piece of work, I think it's a good kind of line in the sand for us to reflect on how to follow this up, whether it's appropriate to do this again, whether we can fold this into other work, etc., and whether those recommendations remain valid. Ultimately, I would come back to we focused on the action areas the authority had set out in the past, rather than going through line by line, in terms of that granular approach, because I think we recognise we can report on the findings we make, and that's the content of the letter really. So what I would say is, when the summer comes around, when we come back to yourselves with our financial sustainability report and our audit plan, those were the kind of discussions we will be having internally. And then, like I said, it won't be next year that we're following this up. If we do follow up, we will give the authority time to consider how best to take these themes forward. That's all I wanted to say, really, Chair.
Thank you, Charles. So just to ask you to reiterate the likely timing of this, you referred to summer. We've had the early evidence of a little bit of pre-summer in the last week or so. When is the commitment to have completed this financial sustainability study by to feed into our cycle of meetings?
So we have fieldwork in the calendar for the final 2 weeks of March. So hopefully, as a result of that, we'll be hopefully be able to reach some kind of draft conclusions towards the end of April, May to share with officers. But I'm sure, as you'll appreciate, there's a clearance process, so I can't be definitive on when it will find itself to yourselves as a committee. But we'll work with officers on the timetable and to make sure that's supportive of your budget process, etc.
Excellent. I think it would be advantageous if this were available by our scheduled date for the authority's AGM, and obviously that's late June, early July time. So that would kind of fit us well if it's possible, if it works with you guys. Catherine.
Just very quickly, I think if the financial sustainability audit is not directly linked to this letter and following up the statutory recommendations, I think we just need the discipline of saying that it isn't. I think one of the issues that we're discussing around this current letter is disclosing in an interview which was about 3 audits with Audit Wales, which many of us did, what we're tackling in this authority, and that sort of discipline of this is when we're talking about this is when we're talking about this, and this is something separate. And I think in the interest of trying to get to an end with these statutory recommendations, if the financial sustainability work, which, thank you for sort of setting out, it's under the Public Audit Wales Act and so on, if that's a separate piece of work, as was the governance work which was done elsewhere, I just think we need that discipline of saying what is and isn't linked to the statutory recommendations. I think that would really help us to draw a line.
Chair, just for clarity, I meant in terms of the statutory recommendations are under a different section of the Act. That's the distinction I'm making. It's not follow up of the letters. Is in terms of a legal basis. is obviously the work we're doing has been as a finding of the concerns as a part of this work. I'm just meaning it's legally, the legal basis of it is distinct, but obviously has been directed by this piece of work. It's probably my my poor expression of that more than anything there.
Thanks. Please don't beat yourself up on that. That's clear to us now. I think it's also appropriate to register our thanks in our improvement work to somebody who isn't on this call today, and that's to Hugh Rees, our expert advisor in these matters, and we are grateful to him for his assistance in taking these matters forward. Are there any other comments that colleagues have in relation to this? I don't see any. That being the case, if I could ask colleagues to note this report, please, and indicate that you're content to do so. Excellent. Thank you very much. And diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to Charles and Tim for speaking to that item. Conscious we've got Craig, I believe, for about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. Is that correct, Craig?
No, all my priorities have changed today. So
I see. Okay, in a previous contact, we were likely to lose you by about 20 past. So that's helpful to know. We're now moving to agenda item 9. Croeso cynnes iawn I Elan, who's Elan of TIA, who's going to speak to our internal audit reports, with the exception of the last one, which is going to come up later on under exempt items. Okay, over to you, Elan.
Diolch yn fawr, pnawn da. So, looking at the pack, my first item seems to be the plan, the annual plan for next year, on page 32. So that's the cover page for our
absolutely
annual plan and the strategy for looking forward. So we are seeking your approval today for this strategy and the internal audit charter, which is appended to the document. If I take your, just to give a bit of background, I've met with Richard and Catherine, and we sort of discussed priorities and your rolling strategic plan, which starts in Appendix A, page 35, is risk-based. So we, as you know, we work on a risk-based approach. We try and, where we can, link all our reviews to corporate risks for an organisation. Sometimes there's a reason to audit something, there's a different reason to audit something, but largely our approach is risk-based, as you would know. So Appendix A on page 35 gives an indication of what we're carrying out this year as actuals and what we've got planned for the next 3 years. Obviously, that's indicative only at the minute, especially for 26, 27 and 27, 28. We just sort of map out, but as our plans are supposed to be flexible, and we can, as priorities change, as the external environments change, and what have you, we are supposed to be planning and on a flexible basis to adjust. The audits we intend to carry out based on my audit needs assessment, which included a conversation with Catherine and Richard, they are listed on page 37 and 38. And then the charter then is on page 39. Because, you know, these have been read in advance, there's no point in me sort of repeating what's in there. No. But I'll just stop there to ask if there's any questions, because like I said, we're seeking your approval, but if you would want to request changes or whatever, we need to consider building those in before we issue a final document.
Diolch, Elan. Just to ask you as just an initial question, I see that we've got 23 days total allocated to this. Are you very content that that should be sufficient, or have you had to sort of pare back any of this in terms of the overall quantum of time that's been set aside? Just wanted to have a sense from you as to the allocation of time that you've apportioned here.
we seem to be working on the 23 days per annum. That must be like back to the contract, but we're content with that. No problems.
Okay. No, that's useful to know, because recently in our experience with Audit Wales, we had some additional not anticipated time that we need to account for, and I just thought it was useful to check that with you. Colleagues, are there any questions looking at the forward plan or more in the granular detail, because this is a really central part of our audit work?
Just so you know that I didn't ignore it, I've read it, it all made sense. It seemed to be the right things on there, so no questions, just that as a comment.
Yeah. Excellent. Yes, we're particularly looking forward in the wider context to the discussion which will inevitably follow around cybersecurity matters, but clearly that's not for now. And so the majority. I think it would be sensible to approve the overall plan if no colleagues have got an issue with that. If I could seek a proposer on that.
Yeah,
proposer, Councillor Hugh,
no,
and Craig to second. And if we can have a vote just to indicate our contentment with that, we have that we've got a complete consensus on that. So that's a positive in terms of the overall plan going forward. So we know the overall allocation of time. Good. And if any points on more on the detailed side, Elan, anything that you would emphasise there for us to take on board, as Craig has said. I mean, it makes eminent sense to on reading. Any issues that you would particularly highlight there?
No issues, just to point out that our internal audit charter, which starts on page 39, is compliant with the global internal audit standards, which we think we discussed those at the last meeting. And so the charter has been amended slightly for this year. Our role is pretty much the same, and a lot of what is asked by the global internal audit standards we were doing anyway as regular practice at TIA, but the wording of the charter has been amended just to reflect.
Okay, so we've got consistency in that respect, which is good. Yeah,
and the plan, like I say, we're happy to deliver this based on the scopes there. And but like again, repeating again, but if we are asking for approval. However, during the next year, 25-26, if anything changes, if anybody feels sort of the plan needs to be amended, we are working on a flexible basis. So that's, it's not completely buckled down from this point onwards. Absolutely.
I think in terms of the wider context, both here within Wales and more broadly, and the turbulence that's out there, it's sensible to build in a degree of flexibility in the light of events, and that's to be welcomed. So if it appears that we are content with that, I certainly am from my perspective. So that if we can therefore note the proposals there under the specific bullets that we have around the reviews that are planned. Can I just seek approval, or rather seek the noting of that as laid out by Elan? I'd be happy to indicate my support for that. And Jochen Vaur. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to engaging with you later on. I think it's probably considered good practice. Certainly, the gold standard is probably for about an hour. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So the specific items with regard to procurement strategy and SICA. Do we need to note those separately? I think that it would be helpful. Procurement, particularly in the wider financial and sustainability context, is particularly relevant. Could I ask you to speak briefly to that item?
So the procurement strategy, we're back now to the 24-25 annual plan. So this was a planned audit for this year, which we carried out. And just to note, as it says on the top, it was an advisory review. As you were aware, the authority the organisation is sort of in the process of reviewing, revamping policies and that. So as part of that process, like we do, internal audit is that trusted advisor, that critical friend. So we can, if we can put in an advisory review just to support processes and arrangements internally, we're happy to do that. So we made a series of recommendations which have largely been accepted by management, but seeing as they were in the process of updating policies and that, we've had confirmation from Richard that the process was moving ahead, things were being sort of reviewed, revamped, and this was just in support of the process. So if there's any questions.
To what extent, Ellen, is this sort of consistent with the picture across the other Welsh National Parks, as far as you're across that in terms of the overall approach to procurement?
I think you might be the only national park that we engage with in internal audit at the minute. Am I right, Richard? Richard will know more than me because of his experience in PEMS.
Indeed. Well, you used to audit PEMS a few years ago. Just to give an update, so I met with my colleagues, some of my old colleagues at Bromwich Coast National Park 2 weeks ago. I discussed the Procurement Act and changes to the contract standing orders. They engaged a firm of advisors, which we are also going to tap in and get their input into the revision to the contract standing orders. As it happens, we've actually got an authority-wide training program on the Procurement Act taking place tomorrow, which will be very helpful. So that's an update. So with the time scales that I've identified there, I think we will meet. To be perfectly honest, I think the review, the published document for the contract standing orders may or may not hit this the March committee. We're just waiting for some final details on that, but that's currently where we are.
Excellent. Good. I see that Councillor Simon Howarth has indicated. Simon.
Yes, Chair. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Just a quick question. I think Richard touched on it there. I believe procurement thresholds have been raised. Is that right? And there are major changes within the procurement process, within the governance of local authorities and Welsh Government. I believe it may be that the thresholds have all been raised, and there are different scopes now for procurement processes. That's all I wanted to say, really, because that was mentioned during another forum last week. Am I right in saying that, Chair?
Richard.
Yeah, I can come back in on that. So it's up to the authority to what thresholds it sets itself up to the minimum public threshold, which is about £213,000. But we have various kind of thresholds of it, about single contract and single quotes, and when we need 3 quotes, and when we need to go to public tender. So that's at our own discretion. But what has happened as a result of the Procurement Act is that all figures quoted now need to include VAT. So that's been the big change, that when you're previous to the Procurement Act, even though it's Procurement Act 2023, it only came into act about a week or so ago. So it's been some delays in adopting that the act as such. So to answer your question, the figures that have changed have changed as a result of the legislation requiring us to request for figures to be inclusive of VAT, whereas before they were excluding.
Thanks for that, Richard. I'm conscious that our chief executive was due to appear at an event, Wales Week in London event, with the Future Generations Commissioner, which I hope went well. That reminded me that recommendation 5 here related to our compliance in procurement matters with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which we've taken on board fully. I don't know whether there's anything that you could sort of say by way of context there, Richard. We've agreed to amend the wording of the policy, but apart from that, the actual spirit of the policy, is that something that you think will represent significant change for us going forward?
I think there have been challenges across the authority with compliance with contract standing orders generally, and I think specifically relating to the procurement policy, we will be redrafting the policy, and that will again be going to the authority by targeted the end in 12 months' time, but hopefully before then. So yeah, I think officers are keen to adopt the sustainable program. So yeah, we are on a journey. We certainly got a vision of where we want to get to our procurement.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Any further questions from colleagues in relation to? Oh, sorry. Professor John Hunt, I hadn't spotted that you'd indicated. John.
Diolch, Gareth. Thank you. My question on procurement: if it's too granular, please refer me to where I should raise this. But it's prompted by your opening remarks about procurement and sustainability. I'm aware we have at least 2 catering contracts that we offer in the park. Maybe there's more. Taking the lead of what Size of Wales is doing, and I'll declare an interest here. I'm a director of Size of Wales, but Size of Wales is currently advising local authorities and schools on catering offers to embark on the journey of their catering being Wales deforestation free. And I'm wondering at which point we can factor into our catering procurement process whether deforestation free catering and local procurement are, particularly deforestation free in this capacity, can be part of our procurement strategy. If that's too granular, I'll drop it.
No, Professor, that is certainly that's certainly granular, and I'm sure it's something that we need to take up. I'm not sure it's a question for now. Could I ask Catherine maybe with her overview of things to comment briefly on that question? But it's certainly something we need to engage with.
Yeah, so we do have a number of, thank you for the question, that we do have a number of catering contracts of different types, and sustainability, local sourcing, healthy eating, etc. are all part of what we look for. But in order to answer that question in detail, I would need to take it away. So we'll take it as an action and come back to you if that's okay, Professor John.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank
John, I think we'll see that on the action log next time round, which is great. Good. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the discipline that will bring. Councillor Hugh Williams.
Yes, just a quick one, Chair. On assurance, the key findings, the number 1 risk area is in red, and there's a date for implementation given the 31st of this month. Are we likely to meet that implementation timetable?
Richard?
Well, as I said, we've got authority training tomorrow. We certainly should be compliant with the legislation. I mean, that's the target. I say with regard to the redrafting of the actual full contract standing orders. To be perfectly honest, I was expecting that to have the report back from the advisors before now, but there's been some delay. So there's still a possibility we can get the document approved before for the March committee. So yeah, certainly irrespective of that, we've got training taking place tomorrow where the message will be quite clear. We've got the legislation needs to be complied with.
Diolch.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Thanks. So if we can just formally note this important report. If I can see that colleagues are content with us doing that. Yeah, excellent. And finally, for now, from you, Elan, the summary of internal controls assurance report. If you could speak just briefly to that, largely taken as read, but if there are specific things that you'd highlight for us, that would be undoubtedly helpful.
Okay, so the main thing on this one is Appendix A on page 60 of the pack, page 3 of the SICA report. Sure. Things have moved on slightly since I prepared this progress report. So cybersecurity has now, as you know, been issued as a final final version, because it's being presented to you today. And the follow-up has been completed. The draft report hasn't been issued yet. It's currently undergoing our quality assurance. It's going through our quality assurance process, but the field work has been completed. So that leaves us with a scheme of delegation and decision-making powers, and then hopefully then with a view of bringing the annual report to the next committee meeting.
Excellent. Okay. So as you flagged, the cybersecurity is the fresh one off the press, which we'll be engaging with later. Of the other items flagged here, Councillor Hugh, is that a legacy hand or is it fresh point?
No, sorry, Chair.
No problem. Are there any issues that colleagues want to engage with Elan on at this stage on the SICA report? Okay, that being the case, thank you for that. Look forward to our engagement a little bit later on. I also propose a 5-minute recess, which is probably good practice, an hour and a half in, and for members who were present prior, that would be 2 hours. That's probably helpful for all of us. If we can reconvene just before 11:30, is that okay? Good. Thank you. See you shortly.
If I can please
and the meeting will continue.
Can I just remind members, the live stream carries on, so if we can turn off cameras and mic. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. See you all shortly.
Can I just check while we're waiting? Do I stay for the in-camera session, given we've got one of our reports on the agenda? Or would you want me to leave?
I think your presence is fairly essential, really, in the context.
Just checking. Okay.
Absolutely.
I thought so, but just to make sure. That's fine. Sometimes we get kicked out, you see, so I was just wondering.
I wouldn't dare.
Okay.
Okay. Just preparing to recommence at agenda item 10, audit recommendations and monitoring. Just to wait for a moment or two for other colleagues to re-emerge.
Chair?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I seem a little bit misfocused on here. I'm having to run the meeting off my telephone. My laptop's like gone a little bit wonky. So if it seems a bit strange, I apologize.
No, you're coming through loud and clear, Simon. I had a problem with my Wi-Fi driver on the laptop last week, and I had a similar need to operate from phone at a full council. So no, all fine, no problem at all.
We've altered our security in Monmouthshire and my laptop there, and I actually had a job get on my phone this morning, but I managed to just get on it. But that wasn't the reason I gave apologies. But
no, well, we're pleased to see you anyway.
Like a little roller coaster at the moment. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Excellent. I think we'd better, for the sake of pace, start to pick up again at agenda item 10. I'm sure Professor John and other colleagues will join us again very shortly. Unfortunately, Steph Davis, who had prepared this and one other item, is unable to be with us today. And so I'm going to ask Catherine if she can speak briefly to these items. Clearly, we appreciate that it's not your own authored report, but nevertheless, I know you'll have an overview for us, and we can then engage with that. Over to you, Catherine, if you're content to do so. Agenda item 10, the audit recommendations monitoring report.
Yeah, so we've introduced this as a new standing item for members on the committee with your agreement. Thank you. I felt it was good practice as part of our strengthening governance that we more actively tracked outstanding audit recommendations. And it's something that I wanted at the executive board to be able to do as well, so that we are keeping with my theme of shutting down audit recommendations and being really sure what's outstanding. So that's what we're trying to do. This is a first run at this report. It's not quite how I would like it. I would like where we have accepted recommendations from auditors, both internal and external. I would like the table to reflect what the management response is, which would then enable you to have the transparency about exactly what we're following up and the action required, and that would more genuinely be I think a useful tool. And also, instead of ongoing, I would like there to be accurate dates for follow-up and probably something about reasons for slippage, etc., against any, so that we're much more clearly closing things down. I'd like to get us to a situation where we're only really dealing with the recommendations from more recent reports where we've cleared off the rest. So it is a work in progress. This was the first pass at it by Steph, so I'm grateful to her for drafting this sort of first go at it, but there's work to do to tighten it up. And also I'd like to thank Elan, because Richard and I have been going through these with her as well. We're having a really close and productive relationship with the internal audit now, in terms of both getting to grips with the overall audit plan, but also our plan to close down, and also get recommendations coming through which are actually well understood and actionable. So that's probably enough by way of introduction. Thank you.
Thanks very much for setting the context there, and you've actually raised a couple of the issues that I wish to raise around having some management comment, and also having more specific dates, so we can actually have a better handle on where we really need to concentrate our efforts, because obviously ongoing covers a multitude of virtues and sins, and I think it's helpful to have a clearer picture on that. One thing that I was a little bit concerned about is actually on page 72, where we've got 3 outstandings at the top relating to due dates in 21, 22 and 23 respectively. I'm not sure whether that is an error, or whether there is there's a sort of sound justification for those to be outstanding. It appears a little bit strange that they would be outstanding, given the narrative that accompanies them. I don't know whether that's a point too much of detail to ask either yourself, Catherine, or possibly Ellen, given that it relates to a tier recommendation. It may just be a typo that's slipped into this into the top 3 columns of top 3 lines of page 72. You see those in relation to ICT audit and other internal audit matters?
Do you want me to come in here, or does the management want to say first?
Whichever of you is better placed to comment, really. Yeah.
From our perspective, these we've just followed up on these in our annual follow-up review. We've just completed the fieldwork.
Yeah. And
that isn't a typo as far as I'm aware. I reviewed the report, and it does seem to be standing from a 21-22 data protection audit. Okay. However, I read the response when I was reviewing the report, and it's correct me if I'm wrong, Richard or Catherine, the policy is still under review, is it? And that's why we haven't closed it off.
The data protection policy is. So yeah, I mean, we're actually discussing with the other 2 parks whether we can do some sort of shared resource on data protection advice. So no, it isn't a typo. They are outstanding. And we will seek to get more kind of definition into what we're doing to following them up. We are following them up. This is the whole point of having it all collated, so that we can just work on these and close them down.
Okay, I just thought there was some tension between the data protection policy has been updated. That seemed fairly emphatic, which I thought was what the recommendation asked. So that was an emphatic yes, we're on with it, and then it's still outstanding. It was just that caused me a bit of head scratching. But I understand with that wider explanation. Colleagues, are there any other issues here? I've just gone in on those couple that struck me. Obviously, Catherine's anticipated some of the questions and comments that we probably will have had anyway. Happy to take any further input. Otherwise, particularly in the context of Steph not being with us today, I think we need to persevere with this new approach, and I think we can already see the benefits. So, if that's the case, can I ask that colleagues note? If colleagues are happy to note this report and to persevere with it into the future. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, the second of the 2 items, and often one of the most positive ones of our agenda, that relates to positive feedback, as well as issues that relate to complaints and FOIs. This was due to being presented by Steph, who has dealt with much of the collating of this. Again, could I ask Catherine to lead briefly on this report, please, Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. So this is the presentation of complaints, compliments and freedom of information update. Complaints handling is much tighter, and hopefully that statistical information is useful, and obviously we take the learning through. The one I'm going to focus in on is freedom of information, where I think I told this committee either last time we met or the time before that we had some new procedures in place, and I was hoping that that would lead to substantially improved performance. The comparison there is between two selected quarters, one of which was when we had a very high number of FOIs coming in, which was around the sort of authority rebrand and so on. What I actually want to do is show quarter on quarter performance, and I would like it to be substantially above 52%, and for us to really understand the reasons why. So I would flag that I'm not satisfied with that performance and want to get it better. So although we are getting some improvements in handling, I think there's still a little bit of work to do to really get that pinned down and operating as well as I would like. The detail of it in terms of the types of complaints we've had and so on, obviously some of that's in the table, but I don't have that level of detail personally, sorry, so I couldn't answer individual questions. But just from my perspective, we should be answering them all really at 100% accuracy and timeliness, and that's the aim that we're going for here.
Thanks, Catherine. I know we have had some HR issues in this section that's probably impacted in the middle distance past on our performance. Those I understood largely to have been resolved now. It seems to me that it would be helpful perhaps for the way in which these individual cases are presented to be broken down a little bit more. For example, the acknowledgement and the response. If we could have the that laid out in a slightly clearer way to enable people to be clear that acknowledgement is done kind of immediately, and then obviously the response will take a little longer, dependent on the individual case. But my understanding is that the time when we were particularly struggling in this area, we were kind of inundated with specific inquiries around the Banner Brycheiniog rebrand and certain associated matters, possibly also to do with some real estate issues that not directly relevant to us. So both of those, obviously in the past, there is a little bit of stagnation here, 52, 53%. As you've said, you want, and we all wish to see considerable improvement there. Is it your view that this is currently, this function has been sufficiently well resourced in terms of the allocation of staff time? Is that a factor here, or is that irrelevant to the modest progress that we're seeing?
I don't think it is a capacity issue. I think it's a process issue. And we do not get very many of these, and we should just run them through according to our process properly. So I think it's more a communication about what's where and with which team and how information's coming back and so on. So I'd like to sort of get into that again personally, and then see whether we can get that improvement coming through. Many of these are kind of many of the sort of standard FOIs are actually commercial companies who are seeking information so that they use it as part of their market research, and we all get, all public bodies get those. There's actually a very relatively small number of information requests that are any more detailed than that. And the other thing I'd like us to look at is, as we eventually did with the rebrand, where there are frequent sort of requests for information, it's easier to just publish things. So on our new website, we're looking very carefully at what we just routinely publish, and then it's much quicker to handle those information requests. All you have to do is direct them then to the relevant material, or if the individual asking the question doesn't want to access things digitally, you can just print that off and send it to them. So we're just trying to get things slicker in terms of how we get standard information out to these requests. That's what's not quite there yet, that slick approach.
So potentially there could be a there could be an element of further staff training as to take this to the next level. But I think it's clearly something that we'll be looking for, with bringing some scrutiny to this in our next agenda, because there should be then scope to move that 50% somewhere into the 70s or 80s, I would hope, without too much delay. Colleagues, are there any other issues that you'd like to raise? Craig has indicated. Over to you.
Only very briefly, really, because I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said, but I had noticed there had been an improvement on this from 25% up to kind of 50-odd% ballpark. And so I was just kind of reassured by what Catherine said. It's kind of Catherine's got her eyes on this and wants to see further improvement, and has honed in on it. Actually, it's a process issue rather than a capacity issue. And so, yeah, good one for us to monitor and going forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. And we shouldn't let this preoccupation with that sort of somewhat stagnant figure there on improvement take away from the pages 88 and 89 of the report, which are the fresh compliments and positive comments, and they cross most functions of this authority in relation to individuals taking the trouble. And let's face it, many of us are probably quicker to complain about things in our own life and our own use of transport and our own engagement with different public services, more ready to complain than to thank people. And there's a really good mix, and there's some really good vox pop comments here, and I think that's the case again. And just suggesting, Catherine, that maybe we refine our approach a little bit to the way in which we feed this back, because in busy lives it may be that some of this information doesn't necessarily hit the people who do need to know that they've delivered good service, because that's all part of that wider well-being agenda that colleagues are working so hard to bolster. Catherine.
Just on that, I do individually write to each staff member to thank them for their service each time we get a compliment through. So that feedback loop does happen between this register and thanks. And then obviously if it's something particularly, we find another way to kind of celebrate that, whether it's through a sort of all staff event or whatever. So yeah, we are trying to tidy up this feedback loop in line with a sort of well-being approach. But thank you for that.
Excellent. Good. So that being the case, I think we are ready to note this report, if I read the mood of the meeting correctly. Good. And moving now to item 12, which is our risk register. Catherine, I'm afraid we're coming back to you. So you've been put through your paces today. We appreciate it. Thank you.
That's all right, thank you. So yes, risk register, we do in line with our operating model. So we review this at executive board level, go through the key risks, ask ourselves whether there are any additional risks and so on. We did slightly adjust the levels of some of these. It just struck me maybe we should show a trajectory on our cover paper, which I think about how to do. And we've updated some of the actions, but they are substantially similar. So happy to take any sort of questions. I think there are a few sort of emerging risks that we're grappling with, including around some of our new programs and some of the match funding and need to reclaim payment, which could have an impact on our cash flow and so on, which we're just sort of grappling with, and we're part of the discussion with amongst the executive team. So I also call out the issue that we discussed around desk assessments and, you know, this proportion of how much time we spend working and so on. So we feed things through from our health and safety work and other key sort of subcommittees to our corporate services group, so that we're sort of getting those risks feeding through. So you'll see we're sort of working on those emerging areas, and we'll translate them into risks if needed. Other than that, the only other thing I mentioned in the paper is that it's now sort of over 2 years since, as members and senior officers, we had a look at our risk framework and particularly our risk appetite and where we were at. And yeah, would just recommend to members that perhaps we do as part of a development day, a similar exercise to look at things. And I think some members may feel that there are more macro issues which we need to reflect in our risk appetite work as well, including the sort of global situation, etc. So I think it's probably timely to do that piece of work. Other than that, no further introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. From my engagement with colleagues on the committee, I know there is a willingness and a keenness to engage on that risk appetite agenda, and clearly a number of things have occurred in the last 6, 9, 12 months that perhaps some of us wouldn't have thought that likely when we previously looked at issues around risk, and we can't be ignorant of them. So I'm sure that would be well received, and if that can be scheduled in the coming 3-4 month period, it would be really beneficial. I sense that we should do precisely that. Colleagues, are there any issues that you'd like to pick up? I'm conscious that 1 or 2 of the issues relevant will be picked up more in that workshop setting than here, but Craig, you've indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Diolch. Yeah, just so 2 points really, nothing substantial other than to note that most of our strategic risks are either level or reducing, which is, I think I said that last time, which is good. We haven't got any spikes where things are increasing that would necessitate kind of further actions. I agree, with what Catherine said earlier and just now about reviewing the risk framework, and the appetite would be a good practice as well. And that point about more macro issues, I suppose at some point I was thinking about more in the budget context, whether global issues increased spending on defence, for example, whether that's going to have a trickle effect in terms of settlements, and probably too early to tell at the moment, but at some point to be able to consider those kind of macro issues and a bit of horizon scanning or something, whether they make the risk register or not, but it'd be useful for us to have a discussion and get our heads around some of the emerging issues, I think. Diolch.
Catherine.
Yeah, for that. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate those comments. And yeah, the financial capacity strategic risk, obviously in the context of the financial sustainability audit, but also this crucial sort of top-up element from Welsh Government that would see that risk going up. I mean, obviously these are sort of backward-looking by format. The other thing I was just going to say was that the other thing that I review regularly in thinking about the discussion that we have executive board is the National Risk Register, which has quite a few issues on there which are more macro and strategic. And I think one thing we could usefully do is work through the extent to which we, just take cognizance of that National Risk Register in thinking about formulating our own risks and our own risk appetite. And that has changed quite a bit, as you'd expect, over the last iteration. I think that's probably another reason to do that review.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that makes good sense. Are there any other comments from members on this item, please? Councillor Hugh Williams.
Yeah, just to say, I was going to ask a question, but Catherine already answered it, to be honest with what she just said. But we go through all these reports, and the thread that goes through them all is our financial situation and capacity. I mean, many of these can be addressed if we can put those 2 massive items in the right sort of place. And I haven't got the answer, but it is a thread I think we can put things right if we get finance, monies and capacity. It's just a comment. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.
I know it's stating the bleeding obvious, but there we are.
No, sometimes it does need bear restating. In that case, if there are no further questions or reflections, I'd ask that we note that report. Colleagues are content to do so. I've not been advised of any items of urgent business, and there are therefore none to consider under agenda item 13. However, under agenda item 14, we need to move access to information, and the recommendation that I'm seeking approval for is that pursuant to the provisions of section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 12, 13, 14 and 16 of Part 4 of Schedule 12A of the above Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Do I have a proposer for that? I have Councillor Liam Cowles and Mr. Craig Stevenson. If we can take a vote on that, please. I'm not sure. Have we potentially lost Professor John? Yeah. Okay, I understand. Excellent. But we have a clear majority. We have a unanimous support for that. So thank you very much. I'd thank all members of the public who've been with us during our deliberations this morning, or those who choose to catch up with our proceedings at a later time. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future. So thank you very much for your attendance, and goodbye.